The glass walls made the whole thing feel cleaner than it was. When I walked into the conference room that Friday afternoon, I thought I was there to review the final board packet before my transaction bonus was approved. The meeting was on my calendar under Comp Review. Dry, normal, harmless. Instead, there was a white separation folder sitting in my chair. Owen Mercer was already at the table, sleeves rolled once, trying to look like a man carrying a burden. Dana Bell from HR sat beside him with a legal pad and a face so blank it looked practiced. Through the glass behind them, I could see Brandon Pike leaning against the reception desk outside my department, talking to my operations team like he already belonged there. That was the moment I knew. My name is Elena Voss. I was 42. I'm chief operating officer of a private equity-backed software company, and I had spent the last 3 years turning a bad acquisition into something the board could finally brag about. I stabilized clients, merged systems, fixed service failures, and forced the numbers into line. I was not the loud executive. I was the one who made the company run. I sat down and said, "This doesn't look like compensation review." Dana slid the folder toward me. "Your role is being restructured." Owen folded his hands. "We're moving into a different phase of the business. The integration work is largely behind us. We need a new leadership model." I looked past him, through the glass, at Brandon smiling with my team. "A new leadership model," I said. Owen nodded once. "Today will be your last day." He let it hang there, awaiting for some reaction he could manage. When I gave him nothing, he went to the part he really cared about. "As for the transaction completion bonus," he said, "because you won't be actively employed on the payment date, you won't be eligible for payout." $6 million. Not a gift. Not some vague executive perk. A transaction completion award tied to the acquisition I had dragged across the finish line one brutal quarter at a time. Client retention, system integration, savings targets, service stability. Most of those milestones were already met and documented. They had not fired me because I failed. They had fired me because I finished. I asked, "Who made that determination?" Dana answered fast. "It's governed by the executive incentive policy. Active employment is required on the payment date." That was when the room changed for me. Because my award was not governed by the executive incentive policy, it had its own agreement, separate, negotiated during the acquisition, signed by the board, outside counsel, and the compensation committee because the company needed me badly enough to give me protections they later forgot existed. Dana kept talking about benefits, transitions, and release language. I barely heard her. I was watching Owen. He would not quite hold my eyes when she repeated the policy language. Either he did not know which document actually controlled my payout, which would be reckless, or he knew and thought I was too stunned to challenge him in the room. I opened the folder. Separation agreement, release, non-disparagement, return of property. A neat little packet designed to rush a person from shock to compliance. Dana turned the signature page toward me. "You can sign today or review with counsel." I signed only the receipt confirming I had been given the packet and pushed the rest back. "I'll review it," I said, "and I want copies of every document the company relied on to determine my award is forfeited." Dana glanced at Owen before answering. "Legal can provide anything relevant." Owen leaned forward. "Elena, I think it's important that we keep this professional." Professional. As if firing the woman who built your integration engine a few weeks before certification, while her replacement talked to her team outside the glass, was a question of tone. I stood to leave. As I did, Owen shifted his notebook, and I saw the edge of a compensation schedule under it. While my line item had been struck through, the $6 million accrual was gone from the forecast. They had already booked the savings. That was the cleanest part of the betrayal. They had turned my work into a number, then decided the easiest way to improve that number was to erase the person attached to it. I walked out without speaking to Brandon. In the elevator, I opened the packet again and found the exact sentence Dana had used. Active employment on the payment date. Standard policy language. Wrong document. 3 years earlier, I had watched another woman lose a payout because someone weaponized that same sentence after she did all the hard work. I had promised myself no one would ever do that to me. So I forced a clause into my own agreement before I signed. The elevator doors opened in the lobby. They thought they had fired me before my $6 million bonus. What they had actually done was trigger the clause that made the bonus harder to deny. By the time I got home, the anger had settled into something colder. That was always my pattern. I did not explode first. I noticed first. I put the separation folder on my kitchen counter, took off my heels, and stood there in silence while the city turned dark outside my windows. What kept replaying was not Owen's speech about a new leadership model. It was Brandon outside the glass, already smiling at my team like my office had been handed to him before I was even told my badge was done. That was what made the whole thing feel so stripped down. They had not removed me because the business no longer needed what I did. They had removed me because the hardest part was finished. The payout line was still open, and men like Owen loved acting like the engine ran by itself once the noise went away. The company I worked for sold enterprise software, but that label made it sound cleaner than it was. We had bought a damaged competitor with broken service teams, overlapping contracts, and client accounts so fragile one bad quarter could have started a chain reaction. Private equity loved the story on paper. Synergies, margin expansion, cross-sell upside. In real life, it was a bleeding animal. I was the one who stopped it from dying. I rebuilt the service operation. I cut duplicate vendors. I rewired reporting lines. I created the weekly red flag system that told the board which clients might leave before revenue leadership could pretty up the numbers. I sat in renewal calls, escalation calls, lender prep, audit review, and executive sessions until I knew every weak joint in the machine better than the people who bragged about owning it. I was never the loudest executive in the room. That was part of the problem. Men like Owen trusted noise. They trusted self-promotion. I was useful in a way that made people comfortable stealing from me. Quiet women in operations get treated like infrastructure, essential while you need them. Invisible the second you think you can put your own name on the result. By Monday morning, that was already happening. One former colleague, careful and nervous, forwarded me a note from a client introduction. Brandon had been presented as the executive now leading the company's post-integration operating model. That phrase was mine. I had written it for a board deck 8 months earlier. And another message showed Owen telling directors we were entering a new growth chapter now that the heavy integration years were behind us. Behind us. As if those years had simply passed. As if they had not passed through me. That was when I understood the firing was only half of it. The other half was authorship. They did not just want the money off the books. They wanted distance from the fact that I had built the thing they were now selling as a stable platform. But they had one problem. The final milestone certification was not a speech. It was a package. I had designed it that way on purpose. The bonus could not be approved just because Owen said the integration was complete. The final review had to be supported by actual business records, retention exceptions, savings validations, implementation closures, and contract reconciliations. There was a reason for every line, a trail under every number. I had built the process so nobody could wave their hands and call the work finished if the support was not there, and most of that support had been gathered under my system. So yes, they had pushed me out. Yes, they were already using my language and handing my work to my replacement. But if they thought they could certify the result while erasing the person who built the record behind it, then they were not just arrogant. They were careless. I looked at the separation packet, then at my laptop bag by the door. They had underestimated more than my memory. They had underestimated the structure I left behind, and that was going to matter very soon. I got home that night and did not pour a drink, call anyone, or let myself spiral. I opened my archive. That was the difference between me and people like Owen Mercer. He moved when he smelled advantage. I moved when I had the documents in front of me. I kept a private, lawful set of transaction materials from the acquisition because I had lived through enough executive politics to know memory was worthless once money got involved. My dining table disappeared under binders, printed drafts, and dated deal folders. I found the one I wanted in less than 10 minutes. Blue tab, compensation, a final signed, transaction completion award agreement. I sat down, opened it, and read every line like I had never seen it before. Then I found the clause. 3 years earlier, when the company bought our competitor, I had refused to let my payout ride on the standard executive bonus plan. I knew exactly what that plan could do. It looked harmless until someone wanted to use it as a weapon. One line about active employment on the payment date, and suddenly years of work could be turned into nothing if the wrong executive decided to clean the books at the right moment. I had seen it happen to another woman at a prior company. She carried a failing division across the line, got pushed out right before payout, and spent months listening to men explain why the policy was the policy. I never forgot the look on her face when she realized they had been planning the timing the whole time. So when our acquisition closed, I insisted on separate language. Not special treatment, protection. My agreement said that if I was terminated without cause after substantial completion of the listed milestones, then my award would still be treated as earned once the underlying numbers confirmed performance. In plain English, the company could not wait until the hard part was done, fire me, and pretend the work had vanished with my badge. There was more. If a dispute came up before final certification, the compensation committee had to review the actual business records as they existed on the date of my termination. Not a revised story, not a new executive narrative. Not Owen standing in a boardroom saying the company had entered a new chapter. The real records. The ones built while I was still there. I leaned back and let that settle. That was why Dana's language in the conference room mattered so much. She had not cited my agreement. She had cited the standard policy. Either they had not checked the controlling document, which was reckless, or they had checked and hoped I would not push back, which was worse. Then I kept reading and found the second blade. Fee shifting. If the company denied payment in bad faith and lost, it would not just owe me the award. It would owe my legal costs too. That turned this from a compensation fight into a governance problem. Because if they knowingly denied a valid $6 million obligation, then the exposure did not disappear just because Owen wanted it off the forecast. It became a liability. A real one. The kind auditors asked about. The kind lenders noticed. The kind boards hated being surprised by. I felt something close to relief for the first time since Friday. Not because I had won. I had not. But because I finally knew they had made a mistake big enough to matter. I went back into the archive and kept digging. Past the signed agreement. Past the board approval memo. Past redline drafts from outside counsel. Then I found the document that made me go still. A draft certification schedule prepared by our CFO 2 weeks before my firing. My name was on it. My award tier was marked at the top level. The projected payout line read $6 million. They had not guessed what I was owed. They had already calculated it. I looked at the page for a long time, then placed it beside the agreement on the table. They did not fire me because my bonus was uncertain. They fired me because it was almost certain. And now I had the clause, the paper trail, and proof that someone inside that company had already expected to pay me before Owen decided saving $6 million mattered more than telling the truth. The next morning, I did the thing people never expect when they think they have cornered you. I got quieter. I did not send angry emails. I did not text old coworkers fishing for gossip. I did not post some vague quote online about betrayal and karma. People who panic make noise. Noise gives the other side time to shape the story. What I needed was a record. By noon, I was sitting across from Mara Singh in a law office with no art on the walls and a view of another building's concrete parking structure. She was the kind of lawyer powerful companies hate because she did not waste words and did not get impressed by titles. She had handled executive compensation disputes, board fights, and termination cases where the public story and the documented story were very different things. She read my agreement once, then read the denial language from HR twice. Finally, she looked up and said, "They used the wrong document." "I know." "Do they know?" "That," I said, "is the part I'm interested in." The corner of her mouth moved, almost a smile. I spent the next 2 days turning my memory into evidence. Every lawful copy I had came out: board decks, milestone reports, email chains, compensation drafts, client renewal notes, internal operating memos, historical reporting templates. I built a timeline from the acquisition through my termination, not based on how it felt, but based on what the company had said at each step while it still needed me. We marked every time the board materials named me as executive lead on integration. Every week the targets were shown as achieved or on track. Every place where the business used my reporting model to prove the acquisition was working. Every message showing Brandon had been looped into my framework before I was terminated. That mattered because it cut through the coming lie. If this had been a real performance issue, you do not quietly install the replacement before the review exists. Mara kept bringing me back to one question. What did they know, and when did they know it? That question turned emotion into structure. We separated documents into piles: control, knowledge, timing, contradiction, exposure. By the end of the second day, my dining table looked less like a home and more like a war room built by someone who preferred spreadsheets to weapons. Then Mara sent the preservation notice. It was beautiful in the way only cold things can be. No shouting, no threats, no dramatic legal thunder. On just a formal demand that the company preserve all records related to my award, my termination, milestone certification, internal compensation analysis, board materials, HR communications, and any documents connected to the stated reason for my departure. Then she asked one simple follow-up question to HR. Please identify the document or documents on which the company relied in concluding Ms. Voss is not eligible for payment. That was it. No argument, no explanation. Just a clean chance for them to choose whether they wanted to correct themselves or commit. The answer came back the next day. Dana responded in writing that my payment was not owed under the executive incentive policy because I was not actively employed on the scheduled payout date. I read the email twice, then handed my laptop across the table to Mara. Though she scanned it and said, "Good." Most people would not have understood why that answer was good. It was good because it transformed their mistake into a position. Not confusion, not a rushed HR sentence. A position. Something discoverable, something defendable if they were foolish enough to keep defending it. While that was happening, I learned through a contact I trusted that the company had a lender update coming before quarter close, and a compensation committee review shortly after. Timing started to matter almost as much as proof. Move too early, and Owen could bury the issue inside a routine legal disagreement. Move too late, and they might try to certify around the problem. So I told Mara to prepare the formal claim, but not send it yet. She asked, "Waiting for what?" "For them," I said. "Yeah, to believe their own lie." That was the moment the fight changed. I was no longer trying to convince them they had treated me unfairly. I was building a record that would make it expensive for them to pretend they had not. The first thing Brandon Pike did on Monday morning was move into my office before my name had even been removed from the internal milestone tracker. That told me everything I needed to know about how long this had been planned. One of my former directors sent me a photo without comment. My books were gone from the shelf. The orchid from my window ledge had been pushed to the credenza like an afterthought. Brandon's blazer was hanging on the back of my chair. My chair. It should have made me angry. Instead, it made me patient. Because people who take a seat too early usually reveal what they do not understand about the person who used to sit there. Owen made the next mistake 2 days later. He held a company town hall and framed my exit as a strategic shift. One of my old team leads, who knew exactly what was happening but also knew how to survive, sent me the slide deck that same night. The headline on slide 3 said, "From integration discipline to vision-led growth." I actually laughed when I saw it. Not because it was funny, because it was so transparent. Owen stood in front of the company and talked about how the hard integration years were now behind us. He said the business had reached a new phase. He credited strong executive alignment and Brandon's fresh operating perspective for the margin lift and renewal stability we were now enjoying. But the margin lift was built on vendor cuts I negotiated. The renewal stability came from service recovery systems I designed. The weekly escalation model Brandon was now presenting as his framework had my fingerprints all over it. He was selling my work back to the company as if it had appeared the minute he walked in. That would have been insulting on its own. But it also created a problem for them. Every claim in that deck could be checked against months of board materials, staffing maps, escalation logs, and operating reviews showing exactly who had led what. Owen was not just rewriting the story. He was rewriting it in a way the existing record could disprove. Then the business itself started pushing back. One of our largest insurance clients had a renewal meeting with Brandon and the account team. Brandon tried to force a pricing change tied to a service model update, probably because he wanted to show quick confidence and strategic boldness. The problem was that he did not understand the side terms I had negotiated during integration to keep that account from walking. The client stopped him in the meeting. A week later, I saw the internal escalation note during case prep. It quoted the client almost word for word. "Why is Elena Voss no longer on this account if the service commitments are changing?" That line mattered more than people might think. In companies like ours, client trust gets spoken about in vague slogans until someone important starts asking for a specific person by name. Then it becomes operational risk. Brandon was not interchangeable with me. The client knew it before the board did. Dana made the next mistake in writing. After Mara's preservation notice, HR sent over the formal denial letter. It was clean, polished, and disastrous. The key sentence said I was not eligible for the award because I was not actively employed on the payment date under the executive incentive policy. I read it once, then sent it straight to Mara. She called me less than 5 minutes later. "Well," she said, "now they've done it on purpose." That sentence was poison for them. It proved that after being put on notice, after being asked which document controlled, they had still denied my claim under the wrong framework. That was no longer sloppiness. That was a decision. At the same time, Owen started doing something that told me panic was beginning under the surface. He tried to remove my name from older planning documents. Not everywhere. Just enough places to soften the history. A contact in finance told me some archived compensation folders had suddenly become harder to access. IT was asking questions it had never asked before. Permissions were tightening. Old draft decks were being relabeled. That kind of cleanup never works the way executives think it will. It does not erase intent. It creates a trail showing someone suddenly wanted things hidden. Every move they made had the same pattern. They acted confident. They reached too far. They left fingerprints. By the end of the week, I was no longer wondering whether Owen had crossed the line. Mara sat across from me with the denial letter, the town hall deck, and the client escalation summary spread out between us. Then she tapped the paper with one finger and said, very calmly, "This is no longer sharp behavior, Elena. Nah, this is provable bad faith. And once a company crosses that line, the question stops being whether they were unfair. The question becomes how much damage they did while trying to get away with it." We filed the formal demand 3 business days before quarter end. That was not dramatic. It was strategic. If we had sent it earlier, Owen could have buried it under routine legal review and called it a disagreement from a former executive. If we had waited longer, the company might have locked the quarter, briefed the lenders, and tried to treat the issue like an afterthought. Instead, Mara dropped it right into the part of the calendar where every bad decision becomes expensive. The demand package was not emotional. That was what made it dangerous. It included my signed award agreement. The clause they had ignored, Dana's written denial under the wrong policy, the CFO's earlier draft showing my award at the top tier, a clean record of milestone completion before my termination, and a short explanation that if the company denied a valid obligation in bad faith, the unpaid award and fee exposure might need to be treated as a contingent liability. In simple terms, we were telling them this was no longer just about me. It was now about whether they had tried to hide a real financial obligation from the people overseeing the company. That got attention fast. The first pressure came from the audit committee. I did not see the emails, but I saw the effects. Finance contacts went quiet. My old legal counterpart stopped replying in her usual casual tone and started writing like every sentence might be read later by outside counsel. And someone on the board requested the underlying support for integration savings and retention exceptions. Then the external auditors asked follow-up questions about quarter-end compensation exposure. That was when Brandon started having a very bad week. He could present my dashboard. He could repeat my phrases. He could sit in my office and wear confidence like a tailored jacket. But when people asked how the retention exception model actually worked, or why certain savings adjustments were validated differently from headline cost cuts, he could not explain the logic under the deck, because he had inherited the presentation. He had not built the machine under it. The audit committee wanted answers Owen could not give cleanly. Why did Elena Voss have a separate agreement if HR was citing the standard executive policy? Now, why did the CFO's draft show a $6 million payout before her termination, but not after? Why were there already client concerns tied to the exact accounts and commitments Elena had been removed from? Those are not the kinds of questions powerful executives like hearing in rooms where minutes are being kept. Panic did not become public yet, but I could feel it moving behind the walls. Then Owen tried to do what men like him always do when a quiet theft becomes a governance problem. He tried to buy silence. His counsel reached out with a settlement proposal. The number was insulting on purpose, high enough to sound serious to an outsider, low enough to signal that they still thought pressure would make me grateful. And of course it came wrapped in the language they cared about most: full release, no admission, mutual non-disparagement, confidentiality. I read it once and handed it back to Mara. She asked, "Do you want me to respond?" "Yes," I said. "Tell them no." The money mattered. I would never pretend it did not. But at that point, the award was not the only thing on the table anymore. They had tried to erase the work, rewrite the history, and treat my name like a line item they could delete before quarter end. I wanted the board to see exactly who had done that and how. 2 days later, the next message came in. A special board session had been scheduled. Not a routine compensation review. A closed session. And for the first time since Owen tried to walk me out of that glass conference room, outside counsel requested my full supporting chronology directly. That was the moment I knew the problem had finally reached the people Owen could not charm past. The fight was no longer happening in HR language. It was moving into the boardroom. The special board session happened on a Thursday at 6:30 p.m. I joined Mara's office, not my apartment. That was deliberate. I did not want bookshelves or city lights behind me. I wanted a blank wall, a clear signal, and a screen no one in that room could mistake for weakness. On the other side were Owen, Dana, Brandon, the CFO, outside counsel, the compensation chair, and the audit chair. I could not hear the room before they let me in, but I could read it the second my screen came alive. Owen had that polished stillness men use when they are trying to look unworried in front of people who already know they are worried. Dana's mouth was set too tight. Brandon looked like someone who had dressed for authority and arrived at an exam instead. Outside counsel began by saying the session was to review a compensation dispute and related governance concerns. That phrase almost made me smile, because by then, everyone in that room knew it was no longer just a compensation dispute. Mara spoke first, short, precise, clean. She walked them through the governing agreement, not the standard executive incentive policy. Mine. The signed Transaction Completion Award Agreement, approved during the acquisition, built specifically to prevent the exact timing trick Owen had tried to use against me. Then she put the clause on the screen. If terminated without cause after substantial completion of the listed milestones, the award would still be treated as earned once the performance numbers were confirmed. No dramatic pause. None was needed. The compensation chair leaned forward. Was this ever superseded? No, Mara said. Then came Dana's denial letter. Their own words, their own choice, the wrong policy, in writing, after preservation notice, after the company had every chance to verify the controlling document before digging in. The audit chair turned to Dana. Why was HR citing the executive policy if Ms. Voss had a separate agreement? Dana did what people do when truth is about to get expensive. She tried to spread the ownership. We relied on information provided to us at the time. That answer landed exactly the way it deserved to. Then the CFO draft went up on the screen. There it was, my name, my award tier, $6 million, dated 2 weeks before my termination. Nobody in the room needed Mara to explain why that mattered. The company had already modeled the payout before Owen decided to make me disappear from the number. After that, I took over. I walked them through the timeline myself. Calm, no speeches, no raised voice, just sequence, ownership, and knowledge. I showed the milestone reports naming me as executive lead on the integration. I showed the board decks using my operating framework to track client retention, cost synergies, and service stability. I showed the reporting package that could not be finalized without the records built under my system. Then I showed the internal handoff trail, placing Brandon into my structure before any valid performance review existed. Respectfully, I said, looking straight at the camera, this was not a strategic transition after completed review. This was a replacement timed against a pending obligation. Owen finally spoke. Elena, I think that characterization is unfair. Unfair. The word almost sounded tired. I answered, then explain why the payout appears in the CFO draft before my termination and disappears after it. Explain why HR cited the wrong document. Explain why my replacement was already positioned into my operating structure before I was told I was out. Owen started doing what he always did when detail cornered him. He floated upward into executive language. He talked about leadership evolution, business phase changes, organizational alignment, the need to position the company for growth. It sounded smooth for about 10 seconds. Then the audit chair cut him off. That does not answer the question. You could feel the room shift. Brandon made it worse for himself trying to be helpful. He said the integration model had been a broad team effort and that he had been closely involved in the operating transition. Outside counsel turned to him and asked one simple question. Can you explain the retention exception logic for the top-tier certification package? Brandon blinked once, then twice. He started talking about client health scoring, then savings discipline, then cross-functional review. None of it was wrong in the abstract. None of it answered the question, because he knew the deck. He did not know the logic under the deck. I did not interrupt. I did not need to. The silence after his answer did more damage than anything I could have added. Then came the final piece. A letter from one of our largest insurance clients was introduced into the session record. The client was objecting to proposed pricing and service changes and asking why Elena Voss was no longer on the account if the original integration commitments were being altered. My name was in the letter twice, not as a courtesy. As the executive they trusted to mean what the company said. That turned the whole thing from internal misconduct into external risk. By the time the board session ended, nobody was debating whether I had a claim. The real question was how many people had exposed the company trying to deny it. And for the first time since Owen sat across from me in that glass room with my separation folder waiting at my seat, he looked like a man who understood the cost of getting the timing wrong. The board moved faster than I expected. That was the clearest sign of how bad it really was. Now, when companies think a problem can be managed, they stretch time. They form committees, they delay language, they ask for one more review. Speed only shows up when the people in charge decide the danger is no longer the accusation. It is the existing leadership. Within days, the compensation committee approved my full payout under the agreement. No creative phrasing, no partial concession, no attempt to turn it into a goodwill payment. The award was owed. The company would pay it. They also agreed to cover my legal fees because once outside counsel had to explain the denial position against the actual document trail, there was no clean way to defend it. But the money, even that amount of money, stopped being the whole ending. The board ordered an independent review of my termination, the award denial, and the internal handling of compensation disclosures around quarter end. That part mattered almost more than the wire, because money fixes a balance. It does not fix a lie. What I wanted, once I saw how far Owen had pushed this, was for the record to become heavier than his version of events. It did. Owen was removed before the next quarter closed. There was no dramatic company-wide email calling him a villain. Real corporate punishment rarely comes dressed in honesty. It came in the language men like him trust until it is used on them. Leadership transition, board confidence, strategic realignment. But everyone important understood what had happened. He had tried to save $6 million by forcing out the one executive whose work made the acquisition defensible, and in doing that, he created a board-level governance problem with client risk attached to it. The CFO followed a few weeks later. The board concluded the liability issue had been mishandled. That was the polite version. The true version was simpler. He had let a valid obligation show up in a draft, then disappear in a way no one could explain cleanly once the questions started. Brandon's ending was quieter, which made it more believable. He was not some cartoon mastermind. He was an ambitious man who stepped into a seat he had not earned and repeated a story that stopped working once people asked technical questions. After the board review, he lasted just long enough for the company to stabilize the client accounts he had rattled. Then he was moved out of the role he had wanted so badly. And Dana stayed long enough to help clean up the paper trail and then left, too. Quietly, which was fitting. As for me, the company corrected the internal language around the integration program and my role in delivering it. Not out of kindness, Out of necessity. Too many board materials, too many client records, too many people now understood where the work had actually lived. A few directors reached out through counsel and asked if I would consider returning in an operating role. I said no. That no mattered. I was not going to walk back into the same building and call it victory just because they were finally ready to admit I had value. I accepted a short advisory arrangement instead, on my terms, at a rate that made one thing very clear. My expertise cost more now than my loyalty ever had. The wire hit my account on a Tuesday morning. $6 million plus fees. I stared at the number for a long time, then closed the banking window and pulled the old deal folder from my cabinet. The same blue-tabbed file, the same agreement, the same clause they either forgot or thought I would never use. They fired me before my bonus date because they thought removing me from payroll would remove me from the outcome. Instead, that clause forced the board to read every page of the work they had tried to hand to someone else. They tried to save $6 million by cutting the woman who built the machine, but the machine still had my name in it.